Welcome to day 2 of our USPAP class. It's the 15-hour USPAP class. You need this in order to get an appraisal license in the state of Illinois. It's taught all throughout the country though. All jurisdictions need this course basically. You might remember yesterday we had day 1, the whole day full of definitions. Those are words that the Appraisal Foundation has taken and made their own, specifically for the USPAP. We also talked about basic concepts of USPAP and how we apply those to our appraisal practice. And at the end of the day, what are we primarily concerned with? We're concerned with public trust, engendering and enhancing public trust. We're going to continue that today. You'll see all throughout the day, it's all about engendering public trust. And who do we mean when we say public? Do you recall from yesterday who the Appraisal Foundation thinks the public is? Anybody remember?
Everyone.
Well, everyone is the nice broad characterization. That's the one I would like for us to remember. Everyone should be a member of the public. But the Appraisal Foundation specifically means the public is clients or prospective clients. We want to make clients trust us. We want them to think we're professionals. Every decade has a financial crisis of some sort, and usually appraisers are at the center. We're blamed for it, or appraisers going to prison because of fraud. Therefore, we'd really like the public to trust us. Not just us, but brokers and accountants and everyone who's in the financial sectors. They all want public trust. Our way of getting public trust is to have a uniform standards to show the public. We know what we're doing, we have a process, here's what we all do. And we at least have written down, we should be ethical and honest and forthcoming. And our appraisal assignments should all be credible. We have to have credibility to have public trust. Well, today, what we are going to do in day 2, we're going to be looking at standards 1, 2, and 3. Yesterday, you'll recall, we saw the preamble. That's the beginning of USPAP. We saw the rules, like the ethics rule, the competency rule. We also saw a few other basic concepts of USPAP. Today, we're going to be looking at development and reporting. Development and reporting of a real property appraisal, that's standards 1 and 2, and development and reporting of an appraisal review, and that's standard 3. This morning, it's all going to be about standards 1, 2, and 3. The good news is you don't have to memorize which standard has which thing in it. You'll never have to remember standards rule 1-2A says this, because that would just be crazy trying to memorize things like that. Our lesson objectives for the morning, we should recognize that there is a correlation between the uniform standards and the appraisal process. For example, what was the first step in the appraisal process?
The problem.
What is the problem? Identify the problem. If the problem is to appraise a house for mortgage lending purposes, that then tells us what our scope of work has to be. What do we have to do in order to perform the appraisal competently? Standard 1 then says we should be competent in what we're doing. Another lesson objective is to make certain that not only are we competent, we have to recognize the things we need to do in order to be ethical and honest. And of course, there are going to be discussion examples scattered throughout this part. And we'll have one of you reading the discussion example. We'll be talking about it. Oh, and before I forget, we have these little post-it notes. And anytime you get a question, like on a break or on the lunch break, and if you just want to jot it down before you forget it, you can put it in our little parking lot, which is over there. We have a little flip chart where you can put things in your parking lot. Do you have any questions before we get started? Are we good?
Good to go.
Well, just like yesterday, when we were talking about the appraisal process, Standard 1 repeats that we must identify the problem. The appraisal process gives us order out of chaos. It helps us become competent. As a matter of fact, you can even use parts of Standard 1 as a checklist. Who here uses to-do lists or anything like that? In Microsoft Word, I have an app on my laptop called Scribble, and I can just use my magnetic pen and draw, and I make little handmade to-do lists that way. Today, do this, 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 and this. Well, if you have an appraisal process, you can create to-do lists out of the process. And remind yourself, did I identify the client? Did I identify intended users? Did I identify the intended use? So Standard 1 and the appraisal process can help us figure things like that out. And you have to identify the problem because that leads you into your scope of work decision. The scope of work decision is what you should do in order to do the appraisal. The intended use of your assignment leads you into scope of work decisions. And once you have the scope of work, you know the research that you need to conduct, you know the analyses that you need to conduct in order to have what types of results? If you, in your books, maybe you want to highlight credible. You're following along in your handbook, the PowerPoint that we have and my little spiel up here. You need to be credible. Standard 1 is all about credibility. Standard 2, which is about reporting assignment results, Standard 2 is all about creating a report that's not misleading. So credible, not misleading. This pattern is repeated throughout USPAP. We must be credible, our report must be not misleading. And just like Standard 1 is telling us how to develop an appraisal, Standard 1 also shows us the development process. It repeats the appraisal process for development. And as I said just a minute ago, you can use Standard 1 as a checklist. And some appraisers actually put the checklist on their work file. A big manila folder, they've got a checklist. When did I get the assignment? Who is the client? Who is this? What is that? As you're going through that, we talked about this yesterday too, you can determine if you're even competent enough to accept the assignment. If I got an appraisal assignment to perform an appraisal of a bowling alley, I don't know anything. I go to bowling alleys, I bowl. Every decade I bowl. But aside from that, I don't know anything about appraising the things. I would not be competent. Right out of the gate, I would know. Assignment. Intended use. Appraise this bowling alley for mortgage lending purposes. Let's stop. Let's stop for a second while I try to figure out what I'm doing here. And the Standard 1 is broken up into 6 standards rules. It's just their way of subdividing Standard 1. All the standards are broken up into standards rules. Standard Rule 1-1, 1-2, 1-3. You'll see that we break up all the standards this way. And just like I was saying a minute ago, competency is a major, major, major feature here. Well, Standards Rule 1-1, that's the first standards rule in Standard 1, it tells us, well, I tell you what, don't even look in the book. Don't even look at the screen. You tell me, do you think that an appraiser should be competent? Do you think an appraiser should not make a mistake?
Well,
And do you think an appraiser should not make a series of mistakes that could be confused with negligence? You already know Standards Rule 1-1. If you can remember that, you're in good shape. USPAP is not meant to be a whole bunch of rules and regulations that have to be memorized. It's meant to be grounded. It's meant to be organic for you. Obviously, we should be competent. Before we even accept the assignment, we should know if we're competent to complete the assignment. Well, that's Standards Rule 1-1A. Not that you have to remember that, but that's what it is. 1-1B, the appraiser should not make errors. Errors of omission or errors of commission. An error of omission is you forgot to do something. An error of commission is you did something wrong. Don't do that. And then, if you make a series of mistakes, each one in and of itself might be innocent. You appraised a 4-flat, we'll pretend, and you accidentally estimated the potential gross income a little too high, vacancies a little too low, expenses a little too low, cap rate a little bit too low. Individually, each mistake might not be noticed, but the end result is the value is inflated. That might be called negligence, a series of mistakes like that. Hopefully the appraisal reviewer who's looking at your file would be able to catch each mistake as it happens and then get back to you and say, we have a problem here. Anyone have any questions? Everybody okay? Well, we must be competent, and Standards Rule 1-2, which oddly enough follows 1-1, go figure they put them in order like that. Well, it looks at the first 2 steps in the appraisal process. Define the problem, and you might recall each of those little boxes is an assignment element. These are assignment conditions right here. They're another assignment element. Remember step 2, which leads right out of step 1. Step 2 is scope of work. What should you do in order to perform a credible appraisal assignment? Step 2 is a natural evolution right out of step 1. And step 2, the scope of work, would be decisions that you make based off of step 1. If I were appraising a bowling alley, and I knew how to appraise a bowling alley, what do you think I should do in order to appraise a bowling alley? That's what would be in the scope of work. We also today will be reviewing certain basic fundamental definitions, just to make sure we're grounded properly in all these definitions. In order for us to understand the relationship between what we're talking about and public trust, we should have a basic understanding of definitions such as exposure time, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, and assumptions. Anybody remember exposure time? Is exposure time looking into the future, or are we looking into the past? Into the past. It's a retrospective opinion. It's an opinion linked with your opinion of market value. If you're appraising market value, let's say Alexa's house worth $300,000 with an exposure time of 90 days. I'm just making up numbers. But suppose I had an exposure time of 30 days. My client artificially just told me, yeah, do it for 90 days, do it for whatever the market is, but we need a foreclosure value. And we want to know how much we could get if we only had 30 days from listing to closing. Could that be an entirely different assignment then?
Yes.
And you had to know this going into the assignment. It shouldn't be sprung upon you like some big surprise at the end. Extraordinary assumptions, you don't know what's true, but you assume something is true. Hypothetical conditions, you know what's true, and you're appraising something contrary. In your notes, in the student manual, next to hypothetical condition, just one word, contrary. If you can remember contrary, you should be good. And assumptions, basically anything else. I am assuming that the architect's drawings are accurate. I'm making basic assumptions in my appraisal. That could be an example of that. In order to engender public trust then, we must be competent, which we've just seen, but you also cannot allow bias into your analysis. What is an example, do you think, of an appraiser possibly being biased for or against a client? Can you think of anything?
Is like stake in the property.
Maybe. That's exactly right, Mark. Good suggestion. Do you have a stake in the property or in the deal? Or do you have a stake in the client? Maybe you're a shareholder in the mortgage company. If you're a shareholder in a mortgage company, should you do appraisals for that mortgage company? I think the logic is probably you should be steering clear of that. I always think, what would an outsider looking in, what would they think? What would Brian Weaver, the coordinator of appraisal in Illinois, what would he think about me doing the appraisal for a mortgage company I own? I'm pretty sure this is, this is not going to go over very well down at the IDFPR. Well, we can't allow bias to influence our credibility, because that in turn affects public trust. We have to have reliable information, obviously, so you have to verify, verify, verify. And in order for me to know even what characteristics are relevant, don't I need to be competent to do that appraisal? Like I said, if I'm appraising a bowling alley, what are units of value for bowling alleys?
The lanes,
Yeah, number of lanes.
what kind of lanes?
Well, I suppose. I don't even know that much. I know nothing about bowling alley appraisals. I know a lot. I know there are many subjects I am completely ignorant in. I pride myself in knowing my ignorance.
How modern the returns are.
Yeah, the machinery, the equipment, what condition is everything in? There are all
Are they
sorts of
automatic, or
issues.
Is there no dude back there?
Very good, Juan. Very good. Good suggestions. Is there a guy back there who's setting up the pins, or is there a machine back there? You know.
Would that include like revenue sources like bars and pizza?
Actually, Dan, that's a good point. The question is, what am I appraising? And again, I need to be competent to know what I'm appraising. Am I appraising the building? Am I appraising the land? Am I appraising both the building and the land, that's the real estate, or am I appraising the business? If I'm appraising the business, I'm looking at income generation from all income streams. Renting out the lanes, the bar, the really icky pizzas that they sell in bowling alleys, all the income stream from that. I know I'm not competent to do that. I don't appraise businesses. I don't appraise intangible assets. But I know with training, I could appraise the real estate. Eventually, I could learn how to appraise the real estate.
But you could only do that if you were generally certified.
In Illinois, to do that, and all over the country actually, to do a bowling alley appraisal, Dan is right, you'd have to be a certified general appraiser. But could you appraise that if you were a trainee?
If I have a trainer,
So Juan is exactly right. You have to have a trainer if you're a trainee wanting to do that type of appraisal. If you want to do that appraisal and you have a trainer, what should the trainer be? What license should they have? Certified general. There was one appraiser in Southern Illinois, certified residential, and he always appraised farms. Always would appraise farms. I mean real farms, not like a little farmette with 5 acres and a house. I appraise those. I'm certified residential. You can appraise those if you're a residential appraiser. A 10,000 acre cornfield, that's a business. That's certified general. But he was certified residential, and he would always appraise these things. And he'd tell Brian Weaver, oh, it's okay, there's a house on it. It's like, there's a house on 10,000 acres, and he was trying to pass it off as residential. And Brian Weaver kept telling him over and over, no, it's not. Stop doing this. Until finally that appraiser lost his license. He just insisted on continuing to appraise these things. My solution would have been get a certified general yourself train for a while with a certified general, get the right license, stop appraising outside of your license, don't get in trouble with the state. Well, we're trying to engender public trust, right? How do you do that if you're doing things like this and getting sanctioned and you lose your license because of it? It doesn't make any sense. Also then, Standards Rule 1-2 continued, we have to look at proposed improvements. If it's new construction that you're appraising, you'd have to look at the plans and specifications. Ideally, you would have access to the plans and specs. Ideally, they would give you your own copy. That would be nice. Oh, by the way, the plans and specifications they give you, would those be a part of your work file? Absolutely. Even if it's a great big rolled up set of blueprints and you store it in a closet someplace or store it off-site someplace, just for sake of storage capacity, it's still considered part of your work file. What if the builder says, I don't want to give you a set of blueprints. Here's a napkin. Let me draw the house on the napkin for you, which has happened to me. What do you do then? And then I say, no.
Don't spill anything.
Yeah, you can't fool me. That's not a set of blueprints. I've seen blueprints before. And I simply said, I'm very busy. I need the blueprints. At least I need to look at them. I can take pictures of the blueprints. Now with modern cameras, modern phones, you can take like 8 megapixel photos of a set of blueprints and get most of the detail. I can do that. I don't have to take them with me, but I need that. If I don't have that, your napkin is not adequate, and I simply won't be able to finish this appraisal. If I can't get what I need, your work file goes right at the bottom until I get it. I can't finish without that. So it's tough love. You have to tell people, I need this to protect me. And what product do I want to produce? Something that's credible, not a picture on a napkin. I want credibility so that I can have public trust. It always boils down to public trust at the end of the day. And what exactly am I appraising? I'm appraising probably the fee simple absolute estate of the real estate that I'm appraising. I have to identify that. Could it have been a leased fee estate? Could it have been a leasehold estate? I have to tell people exactly what it is I'm appraising. And if I'm not required to value the whole, am I allowed to appraise just a part of the whole? Yeah, as long as I identify this in step 1 of the appraisal process. So I don't have to appraise the whole farm. I could appraise the 5 acres that has the house on it and set up a hypothetical condition, because the whole farm might be 1,000 acres. What am I appraising? A partial interest. This little snippet, little bit of land with a house on it. That's my assignment. With the proper setup, that would be acceptable. I can appraise something like that. And lo and behold, it's our first discussion example of the day. Ah, how sweet. Who wants to read this discussion example 31?
Sure. A local lender has asked me to appraise a 5-acre portion of a 62-acre parcel. Am I permitted to comply with this request? We just talked about it.
What a coincidence, we just talked about that. In other words, you're being asked to appraise a 5-acre parcel out of 62 acres, a whole. What do you think? Are we allowed to do that?
Sure.
We are allowed, but you have to comply with any local laws and regulations. Regulation, oh yeah, Mark.
What would be an example of a local law?
Local law or regulation? Good question. Regulation, I can give you that. Fannie Mae, in terms of residential appraisals, Fannie Mae is big over telling appraisers, what they should do, what they can't do to satisfy Fannie Mae. So residential appraisers are often knowing Fannie Mae regulations more so than appraisal concepts sometimes. Well, Fannie Mae, from time to time she changes her mind. Fannie Mae might say, this year we don't want partial interest. This year, if you get an assignment for 62 acres, you've got to appraise the whole 62 acres with the house on it. That creates a big kettle of fish, because are you qualified to appraise a very big farmette? It's not a farm necessarily, but it's big. And I start to question if my license is adequate. Should I be a certified general to appraise something like that? Well, if Fannie is okay with it, if Fannie says, yeah, you can cut off that little 5-acre snippet and just appraise that, then USPAP's okay with it. Fannie Mae is okay with it. There are no state laws that would disallow it. You're in. You've got it. You can do that. If what? If you feel you are competent, because we need competence for public trust. If you bite off a 62-acre parcel and you've never appraised anything that big before, and you're worried because it's rural, maybe, it might be rural, it might be big, you've never done anything like that before, well, consequently, maybe you should either recuse, turn the assignment down, find an appraiser who knows how to appraise it, who's willing to work with you and train you, watch YouTube videos. That's always an option. Watch YouTube. Well, YouTube said I should do it this way. I can hardly wait to see that in front of Brian Weaver. And maybe read some books on doing something like that. Maybe all of the above is what you need. You'll see threads weaving their way throughout all of USPAP and throughout our course. Aren't we going back to step one all the time? Aren't we going back to the appraisal process all the time? Aren't we always reminding ourselves we have to be competent? And it's all in light of public trust. We always bring up public trust again. The things we talked about at the very beginning of yesterday are continuing with us. So yeah, you can do that appraisal as long as, USPAP's okay with it, as long as local laws and regulations. So Mark, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Are we good?
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
All right. Discussion sample 32. I was recently asked to perform a real estate appraisal assignment. The individual that contacted my firm was not the client and indicated that the client could not be identified. Can I accept this assignment and comply with USPAP?
What do you think?
I do remember reading that it could be an intermediary.
In this particular case, oops, wrong direction.
No.
I vote no. You must identify the client and intended users. In the report, which we haven't talked about yet, that's standard 2. In the report, you can identify the client by type. You could say the client is a mortgage lending institution. You could do that. In the work file, you must name the client by name, not just type. In the report, you could identify intended users by type. Instead of saying Fannie Mae, you could say the intended user is a member of the secondary mortgage market. Yes, Juan.
Can you say owner of record?
Owner of record. The only way I would ever say owner of record is if I didn't know the name. For an intended user, owner of record is probably adequate. For the client, that would not be adequate. You have to name the client by name. Everybody okay? That answer your question, Mark?
Yes.
Very good. Well, again, back into the appraisal process. After scope of work, what comes next? We have to look at market analysis, research, highest and best use. And there is step 3 of our process. If it's appropriate to perform a market analysis and a highest and best use, we have to do those things. It might not be always appropriate. Your subject property might not have a market. It might be a nuclear power plant. Even then, you could say it has a market, but it'd be a very, very, very limited market. Who is in the market to buy a nuclear power plant? Other utility companies, probably. That's it.
North Korea.
Yeah. Dan just said North Korea, so that's a topic for another day. That's USPAP 2.0. Whenever we're doing a market analysis, though, we have to avoid unsupported suppositions, unsupported conclusions. For example, could I say as the appraiser that markets that have purple people in them routinely have lower property values? No, because that would be a violation of fair housing. It also would be completely unsupported. I've never seen any documentation to that effect. We have to avoid unsupported conclusions, and we have to perform a highest and best use using validated data, supported data. The highest and best use tells us, as if the site were vacant, what should be on that land. We then compare what should be there with what is there. And now you'll really see competence coming through. I've talked with many, many, many residential appraisers over the years, and they appraise a bungalow, they're done, they have a value, they go home. But every once in a while, the bungalow really shouldn't have been there. There should have been a restaurant there. Or a 3-flat, just like Juan said. Well, that's nice, but would the residential appraiser recognize that? Would they know it's an issue? Would they be competent to recognize it? And that's a huge issue. Juan?
Now, would you go off of the zoning?
Zoning would be a part of it. Remember from our principles class, when we talked about highest and best use, there was what's physically possible, legally permissible, that would be the zoning, financially feasible, then maximally productive. What you just mentioned was zoning. That would be the second step in that process. Notice appraisers are big with processes. We're big with like a system. Follow the system. Because you'll have thousands of pieces of data, and if you don't know what to do with it all, you get lost. You get lost in the mess. Well, a process, just like the appraisal process we've been talking about, the highest and best use process leads us down that funnel. Start here and wind up here. And I've appraised what appear to be nice, simple, happy houses. There's a house on a busy street, surrounded by restaurants. The client neglected to tell me that there was this issue going on. I look up my comparable sales, houses that are all gone now, replaced by restaurants, and all of a sudden I start to wonder, am I competent to do this? And maybe I should notify the client that there are some issues here too. Do they want me to proceed? Because they thought they were making a loan on a house, not a restaurant. Also, one thing to remember, when you start down that path where there's a different highest and best use, what's there now might be a house. And maybe you have a license to appraise the house. But if the highest and best use is restaurant, you don't have a license to appraise that. All of a sudden, you're outside the scope of your license. And that can get you into trouble. At that point, the client says, oh, sure, yeah, continue. We need this appraisal. Okay, now look up in your contact database all the certified generals you know who would like to help you on this assignment, because you're going to need someone to sign off with you as a certified general on this. Let's see. Oops. So we do the market analysis, highest and best use. Standards Rule 1-4, just continuing the same stream of logic here. We might need all three approaches to value. We might. Cost, sales, and income. I'll bet you anything, if you looked at Standards Rule 1-4 in USPAP, the cost approach says, if applicable, you should do a cost approach. If applicable, you should do a sales comparison approach. If applicable, you should do an income approach. How can you decide what is applicable? So one,
I would do the three.
you would do all three. What if you have no sales?
Yeah.
Then you do two. Well, how about this? You've been through the appraisal process up to this point. You have done scope of work, you've done the market analysis. In the market analysis, wouldn't you notice that there's no market? And wouldn't that make you go back to your scope of work and change it? Because using the three approaches we just saw, that's a scope of work decision. Should I use three? Should I use these two but exclude this one? If you exclude one of the traditional approaches to value, then you basically have told the reader of the report, this approach, which a lot of people use on a lot of appraisals, I decided doesn't warrant usage. We should skip that. Well, you have to have a really good reason for why you want to exclude one of the approaches. You have to have a really good reason for excluding two of them. You can't exclude three, because then you don't have an appraisal. You've only got three approaches. You got to have one.
You got the wild ass guess approach.
Yes, there's Dan with his wag. I've met too many appraisers who use the wag approach. Well, if you have to exclude one, if it makes sense to exclude it, then exclude it. But it all has to be logical. I have done appraisal reviews where the appraiser said they're appraising a condo in a building with 500 condominiums in it. 30% of them are rentals. That's what they said. But they couldn't use the income approach because they couldn't find income data. There's 150 units in the building that are rented, and they can't develop a market rent from that. How many do they need? And they can't develop a multiplier from that. How many do you need to develop market rent on a multiplier? Clearly, there's a disconnect there. The appraisal's got to be logical. The process is logical. USPAP is logical. The output of that should be your report is also logical. If it's not logical, then we go back to square one. We try to figure out, where did we go wrong? Why is this not making sense? And another thing, if you're following USPAP, if you follow the appraisal process, not only does it engender public trust, it also keeps your butt out of a sling. Fewer complaints against you, fewer lawsuits against you. And if there are complaints or lawsuits against you, you follow the process. How much trouble could you get into? They might blame you. They might complain about you. In front of the appraisal disciplinary board, you just say, look, it's all logical, it's all following the process, here it is. And they bang the gavel down. This is why you bring gavels. They bang the gavel down and say, everybody go home. That's the best case scenario. And, oh boy, who wants to read this? Discussion example 33. It's a long one. You're in overtime. I pay overtime for reading long ones.
A residential appraiser offers quick turnaround and the lowest fees in town. The appraiser asserts the secret to her success is her efficiency is her efficiency. She completes her property inspections in 10 minutes using the city assessor's database for the site and building dimensions, and enters data on the subject property directly into her laptop computer on site. Her comparable sales and photos come directly from the MLS database, and she does not inspect them. It is not unusual for her to complete 6 to 8 appraisals a day and electronically transmit them to her clients. 2 of her appraisers have recently come under fire. In one case, her best comparable sold under duress, a situation that would have been revealed by verification with the participant to the transaction. Another sale was located in the neighborhood of a different price range from that of the subject. This fact was not disclosed in her report. In the other case, the subject was actually 400 square feet larger than reported in the city records, resulting in a significant value difference. The appraiser explained that she can't be efficient and earn a respectable fee if she has to measure the subject property each time. Oh, we had somebody like that. Is she required by standards to measure the subject property, drive by her sales, and verify her data?
What do we think?
Interesting.
Very interesting.
No, not at all.
She's just wrong. Busy but wrong.
Actually, thinking along the lines of somebody who is all into USPAP, does USPAP require you to measure improvements and verify data? No,
No, but
it
it's
doesn't
part of
require
competence.
you. I would agree with you.
Okay.
But USPAP does not specifically say you must measure a house. They don't say that. Yes, Mark?
Does the state of Illinois?
The state of Illinois, just like USPAP, would say, we want you to be competent, and we want you to do things that will enhance public trust. I think, let's say, for example, this, what's her name, Anita, in this problem?
Jennifer.
Jennifer. An inside joke. Okay, let's call her Anita. Poor Jennifer. Anita. She is busy doing things that she feels she has to do. I can't fault her for wanting to be a business person. I can't fault her for wanting to make money. But as a peer of hers, I would say that what she's doing is inappropriate. Her peers would not agree with her actions. If what she's doing violates her peers' perspectives, then she's wrong.
She's making a faulty assumption, according to most appraisers in the business.
Exactly, Dan. She's making a false assumption, and she's basically making an assumption entirely on her own that she has to do these things in order to make a living. And I've met appraisers like this. They have a cell phone in each hand, they have a fax machine on their back, they've got, satellite uplink to someplace. Their car is like a hotbed of Bluetooth and everything else. And I'm thinking, all you have to do is just walk inside the house and take some notes and pictures. You don't really need all this. And they want to do 10 appraisals a day. And I'm telling you from personal experience, yeah, you get burned out for sure. And if you're burned out, then don't you make more mistakes, which then exacerbates the whole problem. Well, if you're on this agenda, making more money, how many appraisal meetings do you suppose Anita attends? The bare bones minimum for her continuing education. And she only does that because she needs to keep her license, so she can keep up this pace. She probably complains bitterly about having to attend the CE because it's taking her away from her agenda of making money. If she went to more and more appraisal meetings and actually mingled and talked to the appraisers, clearly she would find out what they think is appropriate. At one appraisal meeting I went to a few years ago, it was your typical function, 30, 40 appraisers who were having lunch. And you know how at weddings at the reception they tinkle glasses to get people to kiss? This is a much more boring meeting, so no kissing. But they'll tinkle the glasses to get attention. One of them stood up and said, I'm appraising a parcel in Chicago. It's going to go to court. I need to really nail the land value. This is what I intend to do. Do you think this is an appropriate scope of work for my assignment? 30, 40 hands go up. He then proved in front of this whole crowd that his scope of work was adequate. And he put that in his work file. At this meeting, I talked with umpteen appraisers, and they all said this was what they would do. If Anita did the same thing and said, this is what I do, and everybody said, oh no, that's bad. Don't do that. Who wants to do that? Then she would know that in front of a board of inquiry or a lawsuit, she would have some problems. She would have some issues trying to convince everybody that her business practice was adequate, that her scope was adequate. You have any questions? Everybody okay? Well, continuing with Standards Rule 1-4, appraising different types of components. This will address issues of competence. Do you know how to appraise these things? Such as, can you appraise a leased fee estate or a leasehold estate? What about an assemblage? What's an assemblage?
Assemble various parcels into one.
So Dan says assembling different parcels into one big parcel. That could be multiple assignments, multiple appraisals. Parcel A, B, C, and D, all combined into one big parcel E. I could be asked to appraise all of those individual parcels and then another appraisal of the entirety. That's 5 different appraisals. So we could have multiple appraisals on this. Do I even know that? Am I competent enough to know how to do something like that? Anticipated improvements. What will be built here? Am I appraising that? Do I appraise the anticipated improvements as of the effective date, or the anticipated improvement as when it's going to be built? I have multiple dates then that I have to worry about. And the anticipated improvements, will I get blueprints? Will I get specifications pages for that? Do I have any knowledge? Or did they just tell me there would be a 2,000 square foot house with a clay tile roof? And that's all I know. And what would be a non-realty item that might be included in the transaction, but it may or may not be something that I'm asked to appraise? Like what?
Equipment.
Equipment, could be equipment. How about it's a house and there are kitchen equipment, there's furniture, maybe that's included in the deal. I've appraised estates where the sales price was yay much, but then the value was coming in somewhere down here. And the discrepancy was, included in the sales price was a car, all the furniture in the condo, what else was it? Oh, all the shoes.
Wow.
Even the shoes were included in the deal. And artwork and silverware. It was an estate sale. The sales price they gave me included everything. Then I had to tell the client, I'm competent with the condo. All the non-realty items, I don't know anything about that. I'm not the Antiques Roadshow. I don't know how to appraise all those things. You need somebody else to do that. Here's the value of the condo. That's basically what I told them. So we also have to know about non-realty items as well. 1-5, all of the standards rules are important, but Standards Rule 1-5, it has a lot of juicy information in it, especially for people who are about to take licensing exams and things of that nature. According to Standards Rule 1-5, I have to analyze current agreements of sale for the property I'm appraising, the subject property. I have to analyze the current agreements. When they say analyze, do they mean look at a copy and write down the sales price? What do they mean? They mean analyze. They want me to
Break it down.
actually break down the contract. Yesterday, we had mentioned how appraisers are gatekeepers against fraud. That's one of our functions. That also leads to public trust. If I'm a gatekeeper against fraud, reading the actual and analyzing the actual sales contract might help me with some red flags that would catch my attention about fraud. I also have to look at current options and listings for that property. Why would I care about options and listings that are current?
Points,
Well,
closing costs.
closing costs. If I look at listings of the subject property, the property I'm appraising is listed for $300,000. It has sold for $400,000. Why? This is a kind of a big deal. I would want an analysis of that. I would want to find out exactly what's happening here. And we have to look at and analyze all sales of the subject property going back 3 years. 3 years from the effective date of my appraisal. Why would I care about previous sales of the property I'm appraising? How would that tell me anything?
Maybe see market trends.
It might help me with market trends, like Dan said. Maybe there were improvements. The house sold 2 years ago for $100,000. Now it's selling for $300,000. And it seems to have a value of $300,000. What happened? They built a house. There's a slight difference. They put on a second floor. Or it's fraud. It could be any of the above. And it's my job to try to track that down. Also, notice, I just want you to remember this just for a minute. They're talking about all sales of the subject property. You might want to underline subject property within 3 years. They're not talking about anything else, just the subject property. That would be a minimum for us. And at your leisure, you can take a look at Standards Rule 1-5. There are comments actually in there and in Standard 2 that talk about these types of issues. And in Standards Rule 1-6, remember we talked about reconciliations? What's another name for a reconciliation in appraisal?
Review.
Not a review. Correlation.
Correlation. Yeah.
Reconciliation, correlation. It's a weighted average, a weighted averaging process. A weighted average that occurs all throughout the valuation sequence. It occurs in the sales comparison approach. It occurs in all the approaches. Little baby reconciliations occur. Well, at the end of the entire process, the end of valuation is the reconciliation, the mother of all reconciliations. That's at the very end of the process. We are expected, according to USPAP, to perform reconciliations. And at the end, especially, the reconciliation, you have to be competent to do the reconciliation properly. You can't allow bias to enter into your reconciliation. And you have to look at the quality and quantity of data and the relevance of the approaches. You decided in your scope of work not to include one of the approaches. Let's pretend the income approach. You decided to exclude it. Then in the reconciliation, you have to reconcile what's left, cost and sales comparison approach, and maybe discuss why the other approach wasn't relevant. So repeat. Redundancy, repetition, and you repeat things a lot too. You do all those things.